The Audio Beacon, February 2023.
A Prayer for Lent. Into the dark world a snowdrop comes, a blessing of hope and peace, carrying within it a green heart, symbol of God's renewing love. Come to inhabit our darkness, Lord Christ, for dark and light are alike to you. May nature's white candles of hope remind us of your birth and lighten our journey through Lent and beyond. Amen. Kate McIlhager, Iona. Penitence. Thinking about Lent reminds me of one of my favourite writings of Evelyn Underhill. She says, "Penance was not created for you to discuss your unfortunate character. You can't be absolved for not having a sense of humour." Ed. Weather sayings for February. February Fildike, black or white, i.e. regardless of rain or snow. As the days lengthen, so the cold strengthens. Further Lent reading. I am sure there are very many good books for Lent reading, but may I suggest two published in the last 18 months, which are not so much on the spiritual disciplines as on broadening our understanding of the Church in England and elsewhere, both written by me. A Witness of Struggle, Telling Tales of a Rambling Rector. Olympic Publishing, January 2023. Patrick Whitworth. Imagine the story of a boy growing up in Germany in the 1950s, in Berlin with the wall newly built in 1961 to 63, in France and England, and having a spiritual awakening or epiphany whilst at university after spending 8 months travelling and working his way around the States in 1968. While in the US, he had many experiences of a country caught up with the Vietnam War, civil rights, and the new wave of permissive culture rolling across conservative America. Ordained aged 25, after a brief year in commerce and 3 years theological training, he could not get travel out of his system. Travel in France, Italy, the Balkans and Spain gave way to more adventurous visits to Eastern Europe, Russia, Israel, Egypt, India and West and East Africa. Often to countries struggling to find their future because of war, political oppression or religious strife. Often he found himself arriving in countries in the midst of political turmoil. Nigeria under a military dictatorship in the 1990s. Egypt in 2011, soon after the Arab Spring. South Sudan in 2012. Ukraine in December 2013, during an uprising against the Russian puppet government. Armenia in 2018, when the old guard were being thrown out, and the Baltic states in 2021. At other times, he was in places of great spiritual significance: Jerusalem, Amritsar, Kiev, Damascus, and Mount Athos. He saw how the church was faring in very different places. It is an account of one curious, inquisitive individual with a story to share, often amusing, about the struggles of peoples to find their destiny, and the joy of meeting people across the divides of race and history, who at heart have the same hopes and fears as all of us. Available from the author, signed, for £20 at pjwhitworth15@gmail.com or online through Amazon at $24.99. And Did Those Feet? The story and character of the English Church from 200 AD to 2020. Patrick Whitworth, April 2021. Sacristy Press. There has not been a book on the English Church and its journey through history, with all its twists and turns, since David Edwards completed his 3-volume work in the 1980s. Edwards left off the story in the 1930s. I have, in a single volume of 660 pages, extended the account of the English Church until 2020 and the start of the pandemic, when the churches were closed for the first time since the papal interdict against King John in 1208. Starting with Christianity during the Roman period, proceeding through the conversion of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms when Christianity first came to Canterbury, the book recounts the benefits and corruptions of the medieval church. Thereafter, the seismic changes of the Reformation gave England a Bible in English and a prayer book still in use today, e.g. Matins last month. But there also came the splintering of the church in the Commonwealth, the arrival of Baptists, Presbyterians, Quakers, Congregationalists, Independents, and later Methodists and Pentecostals. At the same time, Roman Catholics were sanctioned or banned for near on 300 years until 1829, when the Duke of Wellington and Robert Peel combined to bring them relief. The challenges of the Industrial Revolution deeply challenged all churches to reach out to the urban and rural poor, with very mixed success. Following 2 world wars, great social change, and deep shifts in philosophy and outlook, the church struggled to meet a new age from the late 1960s onwards. In a review in the Church Times, Professor G.R. Evans of Cambridge University wrote the whole book makes a superb guidebook to 2 millennia of the Church in England that has certainly changed. October 2021. Available from Patrick, signed for £30, or £35 online through Amazon. Lent Course 2023. The Vicarage, 3 Elizabeth Gardens, Canterbury, 10 a.m. to 12 noon. To be repeated at 7:30 p.m. if sufficient interest. Wednesdays, 22nd of February, 8th of March, 15th of March, 22nd of March, 29th of March. A course for people who are interested in looking more deeply at expressing their faith or considering any kind of ministry, whether local or national. This is an opportunity to share thoughts and grow together. Session 1, Being Disciples. Session 2, Being Called. Session 3, Working Together. Session 4, Sustaining Ministry. Session 5, Discernment. Reverend Annette Shannon and Reverend Mike Saunders. Day sessions. To book your place, please ring 01488 646 385 or email reverendannette@aol.co.uk. William Winterbourne Annual Commemoration. This year we were joined by members of William's family. Owing to travel difficulties, our trades union and Merle representatives from Reading were late, but arrived just in time to take part in reading accounts of William's death, to observe a minute's silence, and to sing the modern folk song composed for the occasion. At this act of remembrance, we pay tribute to all across the Benefice who paid the price of trying to alleviate the desperate situation that agricultural workers and other workers found themselves in. William paid with his life despite many pleas for mercy. Others were transported. Matins. After a long absence, the service of Matins was held in St Mary's, Canterbury. A congregation of 27 renewed their acquaintance with the Book of Common Prayer, though many knew it by heart. Chris rehearsed us in singing. If continued, we will gently increase the range of canticles and say those we have not yet mastered. Over the years, we have tried to offer a range of services so that all may feel included in the range of corporate worship. The lack of priests and the COVID pandemic have inevitably restricted the services available. We are now in a new phase, and as the late Alfred Martin Johns would say to us all, let forward be the watchword. If Matins is a service you like and find helpful, then in modern parlance, use it or lose it. I have remarked to a few of you lately that in the days of my youth, friends, including Overton Church organist, formed a group which played in nightclubs, dances, etc. The vicar asked them to lead monthly modern evensong. It was popular, and though some of you doubt it, you can sing Fight the Good Fight to the tune of Yellow Submarine. Penny. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. John chapter 15, verse 12. Dear friends, when my brother was 9 years old, a few days after Christmas, my father died. My sister was 21. I was 23. My dad was only 48 years old. It was a difficult time for my family, but we tried to support each other. Then, when my brother was 18 years old, and in the upper sixth, just about to take his A-levels, our mum died suddenly, aged only 55 years. It was very traumatic. My sister and I struggled to know what we should do to help our brother whilst coping with our own grief, part-time work, limited finances, and small children. I was running a brownie pack at the time, and I remember one brownie mum knocking on my door just a few hours after Mum's death. Her eyes were full of compassion, and she thrust a beautiful bunch of garden flowers towards me and said simply, "I am just so sorry." I knew the gesture had not been easy, but she had set aside her discomfort to reach out to me in kindness. I found that thought so very touching, and still do. I also recall the gentle words of condolence expressed in the cards we received from people in our home village. Their shared memories and offers of support helped us to feel loved through our grief. I often hear gratitude expressed during my pastoral visits to families. Grieving relatives are often pleasantly surprised that so many have taken the time to write letters or to telephone them. These gestures show that others are thinking and praying for them. They do not take away the pain, but can provide reassurance and bolster a sense of belonging. However, I also remember the pain of watching people quickly crossing the road to avoid facing me on the school run after the loss of my mum. And I will never forget the shock of watching my lovely brother breaking down and sobbing one evening after Mum had died. He had discovered that his classmates were excluding him from all of their 18th birthday parties that year and the end of exams celebration. He felt rejected and stigmatised on top of his grief. When he so needed his friends to gather around him, they had stepped away, not wanting to be affected. We understood that it was for their self-protection and out of misguided respect, but I was so grateful for the one friend who stuck with him through it all, despite being under pressure of her own examinations, and to her parents who welcomed him into their home at various points and spent a lot of time listening with a surrogate, patient, parental ear. The love and encouragement of friends and family are so important through any period of adjustment after the loss of a loved one. Loss can also be as a result of a relationship breakdown, loss of employment, or of a home. Making time to reach out to someone, to actively listen, to share memories, or to provide practical support helps to restore their confidence. When you walk with someone in grief, you are giving one of life's most precious gifts, yourself. And in doing so, you are displaying the kind of love and comfort that God surrounds us with. I pray that we will strive to make time to be there for each other and to actively listen. Amen. With love and prayers, Annette. Commemorations in February. 4th, Gilbert of Sempringham was born in Sempringham, Lincolnshire, into a wealthy family. Sent to France for his higher education, he decided to pursue seminary studies. Returning to England not yet ordained a priest, he inherited several estates from his father. But Gilbert avoided the easy life he could have led under the circumstances. Instead, he lived a simple life at a parish, sharing as much as possible with the poor. Following his ordination to the priesthood, he served as parish priest at Sempringham. Among the congregation were 7 young women who had expressed to him their desire to live in religious life. In response, Gilbert had a house built for them adjacent to the church. There they lived an austere life, but one which attracted even more numbers. Eventually, lay sisters and lay brothers were added to work the land. The religious order formed eventually became known as the Gilbertines, although Gilbert had hoped the Cistercians or some other existing order would take on the responsibility of establishing a rule of life for the new order. The Gilbertines, the only religious order of English origin founded during the Middle Ages, continued to thrive. But the order came to an end when King Henry VIII suppressed all Catholic monasteries. 27th, George Herbert, much loved poet and priest. He was born in Wales into an artistic and wealthy family and largely raised in England. He received a good education and was admitted to Trinity College, Cambridge. He went there with the intention of becoming a priest, but he became the university's public orator and attracted the attention of James I. He became an MP in 1624. After the death of King James, Herbert renewed his interest in ordination. He gave up his secular ambitions in his mid-30s and took holy orders in the Church of England, spending the rest of his life as the rector of the rural parish of Fuggleston and Bremerton, just outside Salisbury. He and his wife Jane gave a home to 3 orphaned nieces. He was noted for unfailing care for his parishioners, bringing the sacraments to them when they were ill and providing food and clothing for those in need. He was never a healthy man and had died of consumption, aged 39. Those of us who had a daily school assembly will probably not need reminding of the hymn, "Let all the world in every corner sing," one of his popular hymns still sung today. Living in the Schoolhouse, Teachers in Our Benefice Schools at the End of the 19th Century, by Tessa Locke. Today, 3 of the villages in our benefice have village schools. 2 of them, Inkpen and Emborne, are still based in their original Victorian buildings, just like many other primary schools in West Berkshire. However, you might be surprised to find out that, at the end of the 19th century, there were twice that many village schools in what is now our benefice. By the middle of the 19th century, many towns and villages benefited from schools established by churches or charitable organisations. However, it was not until Forster's Education Act of 1870 that local school boards were created with the power to levy rates to finance building and running of so-called national schools in their areas. Thus, universal education became available to all children up to the age of 13. It will be fascinating to research our village schools through documents in the Berkshire Records Office. For now, however, I decided to begin my research by looking at the 1881 census, as by this time those schools opened as a result of Forster's Act would be well established. At the time of the 1881 census, the occupant of the Kimpbury St Mary's Schoolhouse is 25-year-old James Humphreys, originally from Ditton Marsh, Wiltshire. James is described as a certificated teacher, meaning he has gained a professional qualification at a teacher training college. His sister, Catherine, 20, who is living with him, is described as assistant teacher, which might indicate that she trained to teach by learning on the job, as a pupil teacher, which was how the majority of teachers qualified at that time. How Kimpbury parents would have viewed this fresh-faced young man and his even younger sister, both in positions of authority over the village sons and daughters, we can only imagine. James and Catherine did not stay in Kimpbury for long, or so it seems. In November 1883, the Newbury Weekly News reported on a recent diocesan inspection at the school, which found it to be in very good condition. The children are well taught throughout. The master at this time was a Mr. T. Sadgrove, but he did not stay long either. In May of the following year, the Newbury Weekly News carried a report concerning the schoolboy Alfred Sturgis, who was charged with stealing 2 shillings and 6pence from the National School Board, in other words, from St Mary's School, the case being proved by the master, who was then W. Garrett Jones. Perhaps Messrs. Humphreys, Sadgrove and Garrett Jones all found Kimpbury too challenging to stay long, or perhaps they were ambitious and wanted to move on to bigger schools in towns. So far, I can find no record of any of them to suggest where they were living when they moved on from Kintbury, or if they even stayed in teaching. Things were different down the road in Inkpen. In 1881, the occupant of the village schoolhouse is 49-year-old certified teacher Jessie Collins. Jessie was a retired naval captain, originally from East Tilbury, Essex, whose teaching post in 1871 had been in Portsmouth. Interestingly, Jessie's wife Charlotte is also described on the census as schoolmistress, although at this time women were not officially allowed to teach after they had married. Life in the relatively isolated rural community of Inkpen must have been very different to life in Portsmouth for the Collinses, although it seems to have suited them as they were still there in 1891. Despite, that is, Jessie having appeared before the local magistrates in 1884, charged with having assaulted one Alfred Abraham, a schoolboy, and having been fined 5 shillings and 16 shillings 6pence costs. Perhaps the experience of his former naval career led Jessie to take this in his stride, as he is otherwise involved with the local community and, according to the Newbury Weekly News, with local politics. If Inkpen was a relatively isolated rural community, then Enbourne was more so. Back then, as now, the school with its adjoining schoolhouse was in an isolated spot in Crockham Heath, on the road up to Wash Common, where, in 1881, the schoolmistress was 58-year-old Anne Elizabeth Pears. Anne was an experienced teacher. In 1871, she had been teaching near Salisbury in Wiltshire, and in 1861 in Suffolk. According to a report in the Newbury Weekly News of March 1887, 2 men broke into the schoolhouse when Anne was away from home and stole 10 shillings and a quantity of brandy. This must have been particularly unpleasant for a woman living on her own in an isolated house, and might have contributed to Anne's decision to move on. By the 1891 census, Anne has relocated to Hampshire, but not yet retired from teaching. At 68, Anne is head teacher at East Woody School. Today, there is no primary school in the village of West Woody. By modern standards, it would probably be considered too small a community to support its own school. The censuses of 1881, 1891 and 1901 indicate that there were no teachers living in the village in those years, which suggests to me that there was not a school or accompanying schoolhouse, the usual Victorian arrangement common in many local villages. The evidence suggests that West Woody's children attended East Woody School, as, in December 1903, the Newbury Weekly News reported that a request had been made for a footbridge to be placed over the water between East and West Woody, as children went down there on their way to school and got their feet damp. However, for 50 years, from about 1903 to 1961, West Woody did have its own school, marked on the early 20th century OS maps as being somewhere near the village hall but on the opposite side of the road. Perhaps surprisingly, the Newbury Weekly News does not seem to have covered the opening of the school, although the 1911 census shows assistant teacher Celia Cook, 29, from Walworth, London, living in the schoolhouse. Another local school I have so far found out very little about is Christ Church. Built at Kintbury Crossways, close to the now demolished church which shared its name, Christ Church School opened in 1870 to relieve the crowding at the established school down in Kintbury. Whilst the Reading Mercury reported on the opening, for some reason the more local paper, the Newbury Weekly News, did not. I can find no record of the head teacher at the time of the school's opening. However, the Newbury Weekly News of February 1884 reported that complaints had been made that a mistress, Agnes Peacock, had been ill-treating the children. Unfortunately, a parent, Mary Ann Nash of Kintbury, had decided to take things into her own hands after Miss Peacock had patted her son on the hand by way of discipline. The teacher reportedly pushed the boy and he fell over. Nash went to the house where Miss Peacock was lodging and struck the teacher on the head with a stick. She was subsequently charged with assault and fined 9 shillings 6pence, with 10 shillings 6pence cost. As the smallest village in our Benefice, then as now, it is perhaps most surprising that Coombe had its own school. Although I can find no trace of when it first opened, the Newby Weekly News of September 1894 reported that the school in the village had been nobly restored with all the necessary requirements. Local dignitary Mr. A.C. Cole had spared no expense, and the village children no longer had to walk to the neighbouring school, 2 or 3 miles distant. The schoolhouse furniture was supplied as a gift from Mrs. Cole, as was that of the school, according to government requirements. 3 cheers, then, for the Cole family. In 1901, the schoolmistress at Coombe was 34-year-old Elizabeth Dingwall. Born in Chelsea, Elizabeth had been teaching in Fulham in 1891. At Coombe, she shared the schoolhouse with her sister Isabella, a nurse. Although life in the tiny village must have been very different from Chelsea or Fulham, the Dingwall sisters are still there in 1911. One thing that has surprised me in researching this is that none of the teachers, either masters or mistresses, are local people. Whether this was a deliberate policy or coincidence, it is impossible to say for certain, although the weight of evidence suggests to me that the school boards deliberately chose to appoint people from out of the local area. For those single schoolmistresses living alone in a village schoolhouse, life must have been very lonely. Whilst we know very little about the lives of Anne Elizabeth Pears, Celia Cook, Agnes Pocock, or Elizabeth Dingwall, we do know a bit more about a schoolmistress living and working about 20 miles from here, in Denchworth, formerly North Berkshire, in the 1860s. Mary Hardy had been born near Dorchester in Dorset and trained to teach at the Teacher Training College in Salisbury, so she was a certified teacher. Denchworth Village School, 80 miles from her home and family, was her first post, for which she was paid £40 a year and expected to play the church organ. Mary found the experience of living at Denchworth to be so lonely that she persuaded her parents to allow her younger sister Kate, still a school pupil herself, to come to Berkshire to live with her. We know a little more about Mary Hardy than we do about most Victorian village schoolmistresses, because her brother, Thomas, was to become the celebrated novelist, and so some of her correspondence is preserved in the Dorset Museum. But, while the names of most of the other women, and men, are mostly forgotten, many of the 19th century schoolhouses are still standing. During my time as a supply teacher, I was lucky enough to work in many village schools still using their original buildings, though now much adapted and extended. The schoolhouse has been, in some circumstances, sold off, but in others the former living accommodation is now used as classrooms, staff rooms or storage. As you walk from late 20th century extensions back into those Victorian rooms, there is, I think, a distinct change in atmosphere, an awareness that you have entered somewhere that has been in constant use over 150 years. Walbury Beacon Benefice contact details. Rector, Reverend Canon Annette Shannon, 01488 646 385. Jenny Veazey, 01488 657 911. Email jennyveazey@hotmail.com. Benefice Office, 01635 226 064. Email wbb.office.contact@gmail.com. Items for the Beacon to Penny on Ian_Fletcher43@btinternet.com or Phil pji@crestednewtcomputing.co.uk. To be added to the Beacon distribution list, please email the Benefice Office. We welcome Tamara, our new administrator, and wish her well in her role. End thought. A lie is like a fine cloak over shabby and dirty undergarments. It may do in calm weather, but cannot avoid exposure in a gale. Sunday Reading for the Young, 1884. Services in Walbury Beacon Benefice for February 2023. To check for changes, please check the weekly Benefice email if you are on the circulation list. Add your name, email wbboffice@gmail.com. Look on the website https://www.walburybeaconbenefice.org.uk/ or a church near you. https://www.achurchnearyou.com for up-to-date information, confirmation of service times and location. In order to protect more vulnerable parishioners, we would appreciate those attending services in all our churches to continue to practice hand sanitising, wearing of face masks, and respect for those who wish to maintain social distancing. Sunday, 5th of February, 3rd before Lent. Kintbury, Holy Communion, 8 a.m. Inkpen, Holy Communion, 9:45 a.m. Kintbury, all age, 9:45 a.m. Enbourne, Forest Church, 4 p.m. Sunday, 12th of February, 2nd before Lent. Kintbury, Holy Communion, 9:45 a.m. West Woody, Holy Communion, 11:15 a.m. Inkpen, Holy Communion, 8:30 a.m. Sunday, 19th of February, next before Lent. Kintbury, Holy Communion, 8 a.m. Inkpen, Holy Communion, 9:45 a.m. On Zoom, morning prayer, 9:45 a.m. Enbourne, Holy Communion, 11 a.m. Wednesday, 22nd of February, Ash Wednesday. Kintbury, Holy Communion, 7:30 a.m. Sunday, 26th of February, first Sunday of Lent. Kintbury, Holy Communion, 9:45 a.m. West Woody, Matins, 11:15 a.m.